Well, his bio says Rick Mercer, Canadian comedian, television personality, political satirist, and author, best known for his work on the CBC television comedy show, This Hour's 22 Minutes, of course, Made in Canada, and Rick Mercer Report. And he's an author. He is about to embark on a tour, the Will They or Won't They tour with Jann Arden. And I have to say, it's been a while, it's been a minute, as the kids say. Rick Mercer, it's so nice to speak with you. How are things today for Rick Mercer?
Things are pretty good. I can't complain. I'm in Newfoundland. I managed to get an extended stay in Newfoundland this trip home, and did some work at my folks' place. And yesterday, in the pouring rain, was loading a trailer to the dump. But it was cathartic. It's done. It's good.
Well, I was going to ask, I know you had a Toronto area cell phone number, an Ontario cell phone, and you said Newfoundland time. And I thought, well, maybe he's such a Newfoundland nationalist. That's part of his plan to always give his times in Newfoundland time zones.
All the clocks in my house are completely different time zone. No, I'm close to 50-50 now between Newfoundland and Toronto. When the Mercer report wrapped up, it was a big adjustment for a whole bunch of reasons, but the main one was I no longer had to go to an office. And any kind of concern I had about whether I made the right decision to shut the show down or not was quickly eclipsed by the pandemic. And I was very fortunate. I had a cabin in Newfoundland that I could go hide in. And then I wrote a book. And it was a memoir, and I had been resisting the suggestion that I write a memoir. And it was easy to resist because I had work. And then suddenly, like so many other people, I was thrown out of work. There was no work. So I wrote the book, and I discovered I really like the book writing business. I've since written another one. And I don't need to be in an office every day like I did when I had the TV show. And my office is my shed where I wrote 2 books. So I don't know where I am. I'm a nomad, currently a nomad.
And so much of the conversation has been about the pandemic and what we did to survive. And as you say, you wrote a book. And it's not a surprise to me that I went back, and never mind that Wikipedia gets things wrong, but you're in the Canadian Encyclopedia, and it has all of this information about the awards and the accomplishments. And there are 2 sentences in the section that says personal life. Just 2 sections. You have been very guarded about your private life. You've kept it private. And for a Canadian celebrity, I have to give you full kudos for that. And it had to be on purpose. It had to be conscientious. How have you been able to avoid talking about your personal life for so many years? It's a tricky one because certainly I am a private person and I don't like talking about my personal life per se. That said, I'm a gay man. I have always, I don't mind talking about being a gay man. I felt it was important that if you're a gay person and you're visible for whatever reason, you work in the media or you're a cop or whatever, that you do whatever it is that so you can be visible, because I think it's the right thing to do, especially for younger generations and all that business. But that said, as much as I believe that, I found it, and nothing to do with sexuality, I just found it not in my comfort zone to talk about my personal life. In fact, I've done probably thousands of interviews over the years promoting different things that I've done. And occasionally you could be working with a publicist and say you're promoting a book or something, and they say, oh, there's this column that's very popular, and they would like to interview you about your book. But the gist of the column is your favorite room in your house. And I would be like, oh, my God, you mean someone's coming in the house? No. Or even you could ask me anything in this interview, but if you asked me, so what kind of car are you driving these days? I'd be like, well, that's a very personal question. I don't know if I want to go there. So it's just always been me. So it was a big learning curve to write memoir. And like I said, I really had no other choice because there was nothing else to do. To write about my personal life was a big learning curve. And being on the road with Jann Arden is also a learning curve because I have no idea what she's going to ask me or say out there or where she's going to bring the conversation. And I've done this before the tour starts. We did 4 events before Christmas, and they were large events, 1,100 seat theaters, and every single night something came out of left field. And I found myself in a discussion that I would normally never have in front of an audience. I probably wouldn't even have in front of friends sometimes. But that's what it's like being with Jann.
I'm so happy you mentioned that, because I did see, went through YouTube, has all of the collaborations, all of the appearances, and I heard you in an interview say, when you realized that you and her, the two of you had a connection, and that was after the very first meeting. Tell me about that. Tell me about how it felt to come into contact with this incredibly dynamic human.
Well, like so many great things through the centuries, it was a complete and total mistake. It was a fluke. It was an accident in the lab, just like cornflakes. I was in Calgary and I was shooting something, and I can't remember what it was, but it fell apart. The shoot was just not going to happen. And we didn't have anything in the can. We had no safety net. So basically my job was to get up the next morning and figure out 6 or 7 minutes of national television, and we had nothing planned. And the only thing we could come up with off the top of our head was that someone would show me around Calgary, which in of itself is tricky because these things have to be planned in advance. And I thought, I can't show people around Calgary. I have no voice of authority. We need someone who's an Albertan, who loves Calgary, who's well-spoken, can be funny, hopefully, and just be really passionate about Calgary. And my first choice was Jason Kenney, who at the time was the Stephen Harper Senior Cabinet Minister. And I thought, we'll get Jason Kenney. Of course, he wasn't available. And then someone else suggested Jann Arden. And I was a fan of her music, but that's all I knew of Jann was her music. And based on her music, I thought, I don't know if she's going to be a great tour guide. She seems like she's depressive, if you ask me, listening to the songs. They're so sad. But, you know, beggars can't be choosers. And Jann, God love her, said yes, like on hours' notice. And she showed up, and I didn't know what to expect. And everything was one take, and everything out of her mouth was hysterically funny. And just as the interview progressed, I was just doing a mental calculation, funny, funny, funny. You can never say that on television. You can never say that on television. And then she would say things like, I've never seen a grown woman even say those words before. It just went on. And then I took her to the Calgary Olympic Park and put her on a luge and sent her down the mountain. And while she was screaming and her screams were reverberating off the hills, I thought, I kind of fell in love, and I thought, I need more of this. And then the audience had the same reaction. And she became a regular guest on a show that philosophically did not have regular guests. And the audience demanded it, which was wild. I jumped out of an airplane with General Rick Hillier. Nobody came up to me the next week and said, that was great jumping out of the plane with Rick Hillier. When are you going to do something else with Rick Hillier? No one ever said that about anyone. They were, hey, Neil Peart taught you drum lessons. That's great. When's he coming back? They just never did, except for Jann. They demanded that Jann come back.
Was it 10 different appearances on the show?
Oh, at least 10. Yeah.
At least 10?
And it would have been more, except, of course, she's incredibly busy. She's got more balls in the air than anyone I know. And on top of the ones you see, then she's always like writing a book, or there's all these different projects. And so she was just very hard to book, because she does these European tours and she's always singing, and she has an acting career, and, it goes on and on and on.
And clearly, when I saw that the entire premise of the show is two people sitting down and talking unscripted, you're not at all adverse to going off script, but this is different than a rant. It seems like you two are setting up a conversation with no real destination other than to have a good time.
Listen, and I have to back up a second. When you say, you don't mind going off script, I like to be scripted. I like to be prepared. Before we walked on stage at Hot Docs, which is a theater in Toronto, to do the first appearance between us, I was backstage begging her for a plan. Please, God, give me some idea. And she just kept saying, it's going to be fine. And as we walked out on stage, it was like the actor's nightmare. I was like, I'm walking on stage, and there's nothing prepared. Now, Colin Mockery of Whose Line loves that. I know people who love that. I've just never even considered it. But with Jann, I was just thrown into the deep end, and it was very improvisational. And it was one of the wildest hour and a half of my life. And the next 4 were the same experience. It was just wild, and the audience loved it. And by the time we got to Vancouver and we were playing in the Chan Center, which sold out in record time, Bruce Allen, who's Jan's manager and manages Bublé and all these rock legends, he was planning a national tour.
So maybe that's her revenge for all those times you put her on the spot, which is
suggested.
Which is delicious. I had a chance to chat with her before she came to Halifax for a charitable event, and we talked politics a bit, and that's your world. You go back to the Meech Lake Accord, and for those of you who don't know what the Meech Lake Accord was, Google it and find out Rick Mercer's connection to it, because I thought it was just fascinating how, as you point out, the exuberance of youth sometimes perhaps clouds the judgment, and that you can do many things that you would never even expect of yourself. What is it you said? As you get older, the shades of gray tend to become more apparent in life?
Oh, for sure. Actually, when you write a book, and I suggest that everyone write a book, you realize, you have to reflect. And part of reflecting, which I was never very good at, you try to figure out what you know and what you figured out along your time on this earth. And for me, anyway, I look back and I thought, my God, I had way more answers at 18 than I did at 50. 50 seems like a lot of questions, but at 18, you couldn't stump me. I knew exactly the way things should go and the solution to every problem. And I think that's just natural. And I obviously still follow politics quite closely, but I'm glad that I'm out of the opinion business.
Why is that? Is it, you talked about talking to Americans probably wouldn't have happened if you knew they would have a chance to see it. Like, YouTube is ubiquitous
you're
now.
Absolutely right. In fact, I always felt a little bit guilty doing talking to Americans. And the way I justified it in my head, right or wrong, was they'll never see this. They have no idea. This poor university professor from Harvard, he has no idea what he's doing. But it doesn't matter. No one will ever see it. It'll be on the CBC. And in those days, we didn't even rerun. So it'd be like, there's no chance anyone's ever going to see it. Now, of course, it just gets constant views on YouTube. But things evolve. Technology moves on.
But everyone has an opinion now, and they have a platform to deliver it. I'm not sure what you make of the amount of, whenever you delivered a pointed rant, it was exactly that. It was well thought out, and it flowed, and it had a conclusion that most people would say, I agree with, or you got it wrong. But now everyone has got this echo chamber. The internet is giving
you. And I don't know how well thought out my rants were, but there was certainly time, thinking put into them. A lot of time. Because they had to be written in such a way that I would have to write a substantial piece, figure out what it is I wanted to say, and then I had to distill it so it could be performed in a minute and a half. So there was a lot of time to think and reflect on what exactly you were going to say. I think the problem with social media, of course, is that people are posting their opinion within seconds or minutes, and also, so there's no thought put into it. And they may be right, but they could easily be way off. But also, of course, they're entirely anonymous, and that just changes everything. And I don't know what the solution is there, but, when, angry dad 69 is calling you a Nazi, you have to take that with a grain of salt, but there's a lot of it.
It's everywhere. Do you foresee a conversation about politics on stage? Because Jan has some very strong opinions about politics these days, too.
God, I hope not.
Why? Why wouldn't you want to take that on?
She's a handful, that Jann Arden, I tell you. I don't know. Honestly, it could go anywhere. I think both of us realize what our jobs are there, and it's to have fun. And I think right now, in this day and age, everyone wants that fun night out. And I think we realize what our job is. And certainly our job is not to, preach to the choir or beat anyone over the head with any kind of political views. But anything is possible, really. Like, I would be loath to say, no, that's not possible about anything you ask me.
I had asked her if she had any interest in actually becoming political in a really specific way, as becoming a candidate. In fact, I said this quote, and maybe you've heard this before, that when it comes to politics, as men get older, they tend to get more small c conservative in their way or their view or outlook, and that sometimes women get more angry, and she kind of took umbrage to that and said, actually, I think she scolded me mildly, saying that might even be considered misogynistic in a little way, and there's nothing worse than having Jann Arden kind of put you in your place. You would know that better than anyone. So, would Rick Mercer ever entertain entering politics in that way? I mean, if
it was always in the back of my mind. I was very much like, I would suggest, if you were a sports columnist for a major newspaper or a newspaper, in the back of your mind, you think, one of these days the phone is going to ring and it's going to be the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they're going to say, damn it, you come in and be the general manager, turn this franchise around. And they go, finally, someone has asked my opinion. So I think in the back of my mind, 30 years of covering politics, you go like, one of these days, maybe I would dip my toe in there. But now I have less interest in that process than I've ever had in my entire life. And I was pretty interested when I was 14 and 15 years old. And then it became a professional career. But I have less interest. And I hate to join the choir of people who say there's just far too much power in the leaders' offices of the political parties, but there really is. And if you do enter politics and you become, say, a member of parliament, I mean, you have less of a voice than almost anyone in the country, because you can't say boo unless you run it through head office. And worse, they can send you an email saying, this is what you're saying today, and this is how high you're jumping, and this is what you're going to do. And I think I would find that, at this point in my life anyway, very difficult. Now, maybe many of the people in that position, they do it for the greater good, and that's something they suck back because they feel like they're accomplishing goals they have in another way. But I don't have much of an interest in it right now.
I heard you in your conversation with Jesse Brown in a roundabout way talk about Pierre Poilievre, and oddly enough, your piece about him becoming the youngest Canadian politician to get a full pension by the time he was 31 popped up as a recommendation, and some of the other times you've taken to task that whole idea of a career politician. And what do you make of what's been happening with this very simple messaging of, the rhyme, the axe, the tax, and those types of things that and how that appeals to people? That seems to be resonating.
I think everyone's got to sit back and just realize it is they're being advertised to, and you have to be careful when incredibly complex issues are wrapped up in a simple slogan. And whether it's sunny ways or axe the tax, or I'm going to turbocharge your paycheck. What does that even mean? I had a conversation with someone who legitimately said he's going to turbocharge my paycheck. I was like, what are you even talking about? What does that even? He's going to turbocharge your paycheck. So you just got to be very careful about that. And yeah, I used to do stuff about him being a career politician because I think most of Canada is kicking the tires on Pierre Poilievre right now. Obviously they are. He's polling incredibly well. But people in the business of covering politics have been covering him forever because he's been there forever. I mean, it's funny to see him out there. His latest slogan is like less suits, more boots. I mean, this is one of those guys we all went to school with who went to school in a suit in grade 7. I mean, and vocally said, I will be Prime Minister of Canada someday, and then you'll be sorry. I mean, we all went to school with that guy. This is that guy, and that's fine. We need those people, I guess. But it's pretty funny when he's out there saying, less suits. He's probably owned more suits in his life than Peter Mansbridge, for God's sakes.
Rick Mercer and Jann Arden and the Will They or Won't They tour coming to the Maritimes. The second show is in Halifax, I believe, of this tour. I want to pivot just a little bit, and I know you don't like to talk about things that are personal, but are you watching Son of a Critch? Have you watched any of that television?
God. Yeah. Well, I'm not that tightly wound. I won't tell you what I'm watching. I love Son of a Critch. I really do. I love the show. I love its sweet nature. I love everything about it. Actually, I think it's a home run, And I think the performances are great. I love Malcolm McDowell, of course. I think Critch is doing a great job playing his dad, which for Newfoundland audiences is tricky because we all knew his father, certainly the voice of his father, and as an icon. So that's a tough job to do. Big slippers to fill, as it were. I really enjoy the show. I think it's great, and I think it's exactly the type of thing the CBC should be doing, and it's paying off in ratings, which is fantastic.
The reason I mention the show in particular is that you talked about an event where Andy Jones came to the school when you were a kid. And there's an episode of Son of a Critch this year, which Mark Critch talks about Andy Jones helping him become a stand-up comedian. You talked about not really doing stand-up until you were in your 40s, but that connection of Andy Jones, it's almost like, a list of Canadian artists and icons, Newfoundland icons, who have had a touch on the people who have been so funny for so long and have been part of our lives. And I'm just kind of curious about that path that you were on at that time, and Rick Mercer as a pirate, and it was in grade 3. How that put you down this road.
Well, it was an experience that I guess almost all children had. One day, we suddenly got dragged into the library, and there was going to be some sort of local theater troupe performing, and no one really knew what it was, and everyone had a good time. It was great. It was called Sheila's Brush, and Andy Jones was playing a character called Uncle Val. Andy Jones, of course, who is a member of Codco. And all the kids liked it. But for me, it was life-changing. I didn't know that people did this. I didn't know you could travel around in a van and entertain kids. I didn't know you could do shows like this. I had never been exposed to theater or anything. And it was a complete mind-blowing experience. And then, just to make it even more mind-blowing, this character went out in the audience and picked volunteers. And I was like, the kid going, me, 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 me. And I got picked. I was dragged backstage, and I was dressed up as a pirate, and I was put into the show. And then that was it. I was like done for the rest of my life. I kind of knew what it was I wanted to do. And Andy, I only figured out later, it was Andy who was there. But I think if you talk to my generation, going a little wide because like Mark Critch is younger than me, but if you talk to Mark Critch, if you talk to me, if you talk to Tom Power, if you talk to Johnny Harris, Alan Hocko, the list goes on and on. Everyone is really, I don't know, it's not respectful, but grateful to that generation that came before us, because that generation, they had to create everything. There was no theater. They built the theater. There was no place to go make short films. So they created the film co-op. And it's, Cape Breton is the exact same thing. Nova Scotia is the exact same thing. There were these pioneers, and we couldn't do what it is that we do without them having done it beforehand. So I always feel like I stand on the shoulder of these giants, and I know Critch feels the same, and I think that episode certainly reflected that.
It was touching and funny and all of the things that we look forward to with Canadian entertainment. But there is a gap. I was going to say there's a hole, but that might be taken the wrong way. But there's this gap in Canadian comedy right now in some ways that Ron James says, in Canada, it's too hard to be one side. You have to make fun of everybody politically. Or as you pointed out, equal opportunity offender, this, that parasitic relationship between what you were doing and politics. But
anyone who covers politics in a way will always be accused of siding with one party over another, and quite often by people who don't even watch your work. That's just part of the occupation, quite frankly. And there were periods of time, near the end of Jean Chrétien's time in power, and certainly Paul Martin's. I mean, I would get personal entreaties from people saying, "What do you have against Paul Martin? My God, week after week, what is it you're saying?" And I don't have anything against Paul Martin. I was just doing my job. And, and I actually have great respect for him, but his government was just, the wheels were off the bus, and it was just constantly teetering and heading into the ditch. And I was just reflecting that, which is what the majority of Canadians kind of felt. And of course, he ended up losing. That's the nature of the beast. But then people will come back and say, "You've always been a liberal hack." Well, not really.
Are you still working on a Talking to Prime Minister's book?
No, once I got into the book writing business, I realized how much I liked it. And then I wrote 2 books that qualify as memoirs. I realized that I've completely run out of runway. There's no more memoir, thank God. So I have to figure out what to write next. And tragically, that changes. If you're looking at my screen now, there's like 30 books. Some of them are a blank page with a title or an idea, but there's at least 30 there. And I have to eventually whittle it down and pick out what the next one's going to be. But being on the road with Jann is also going to help that because she's constantly writing a novel. So I guess I'll have to sit next to her on the plane and go, well, I'm writing a novel too.
He will be in Halifax with Jann Arden. The will they or won't they? You guys are just, there's such chemistry there. And I think we're all envious of that relationship in a way. We all want to be Rick Mercer. We all want to be Jann Arden in a way. And it'll be here in Halifax coming up on the 29th. That's on a Monday.
We had 3 Atlantic Canadian dates. Yep. We didn't get PEI, unfortunately. One thing I'm learning about these big tours, it's all about the routing, and these things are done years in advance. So we're actually lucky to get the dates that we got across the country as it is. But yeah, we're in Halifax the 29th, Moncton the 30th, and then St. John's May 2nd. And I can't wait. It's such a fun night. And it's also it's something I never saw coming. Like all my life, I wanted a TV show. And if you asked me when I was in grade 10, I think I would have said that. In fact, there's footage of me, I think, claiming that I'm going to have a TV show when I was in like grade 8. I always kind of knew that. But this kind of thing, and then I wanted to become a stand-up comedian, and I did do national tours with Just for Laughs, but I just never thought that I would be part of a duo with someone like Jan Arden on a national tour. I didn't see that coming. It shocks me to this day, and it's the most fun I've had. And so if you can get this far in life and still have that much fun, it's pretty good. I'm pretty grateful.
Does your partner, Gerald, does he travel with you? Is that going to happen?
No. The last thing on earth he would rather do is sit there and watch me talk if he doesn't for 2 hours. No, he's done a lot of that in his life. Gerald is was the executive producer and the showrunner of everything I've done on television, I guess. Well, he was a creative producer of 22 Minutes, but he was the showrunner of Mercer Report and Made in Canada. And so that's what he does. He produces. He runs the head office.
Makes sense. Thanks again for doing this. And I think I have something in common with you, as it was said, a man with no discernible skills. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this opportunity. And I know you've had an amazing career thus far, and it's a ... to be continued, and break a leg on this tour.
Thanks very much. Thanks for chatting.
Rick Mercer, all the best to you, sir.